Okay, now we're recording again. Let me repeat. My guest is AdrianSalbuchi, and his website is ASalbuchi, SALBUCHI.com. But I think what we're going to talk about is your Second Republic project, and you've also got a book out. So tell me about that, Adrian. Tell me, you are pretty much a fixture up on YouTube. You've been talking about the Second Republic for a long time, and give us an update.
Well, yeah, sure. I'd be delighted. First of all, thanks for having me on your show, Clayton. And well, you see, as you said at the beginning of the program, I'm speaking to you from Argentina. Now, Argentina has been through a lot, but not over the past several years the way America has been through a lot, I don't know, ever since 9/11, say in the last 10 years. Argentina has been through a lot in the last 40 years. Now, I'm 58, which means that in my adult life, I've gone through something like 5 military coups, 1 lost war, 1 10-year war against communist guerrillas that practically tried to take over the entire country, 1 hyperinflation, and 2 financial and economic collapses. So you sort of tend to scratch your head and wonder, hey, what the hell is happening here? Because, you see, if you were to look around and say, well, the problem is that all Argentinians are stupid, well, there you would have your explanation. But I travel around, I get around a lot through Europe and America and elsewhere, and I look around and I don't see that any one people are more or less intelligent than any other one people. And then you look around and you figure, well, and as the years have gone by, what happened to Argentina in different circumstances are not isolated events, but seem to now be happening, especially in the past 6-7 years. They now seem to be happening on a much grander scale throughout the world, especially the United States of America, Britain, and the European Union. So when I talk about our last major crisis, which was in 2001, 2002, when we had a full-fledged banking collapse, which threw something like half the population below the poverty line and reduced our gross domestic product by 40%, and although the people had enormous hardship, and many of them still do, not one single bank folded. Not one bank went. They all went back to business. They had all their problems resolved by government. So you figure, let's start and see then how does this whole system works, where time and again it's the banks that are bailed out and not the people, where time and again wars are fought, not in the case of Argentina, but certainly in the case of America, wars are fought in faraway places for the interests of certain very tiny minority groups and not for the interests of we the people, and especially in the past 10 years where you had false flag attacks, which are so blatantly obvious that you figure, okay, there is something deeply wrong. There is something very much embedded in the power structures of the United States, Britain, the European Union, Argentina, Brazil, and everybody that are able to do all these things and get away with it. So, to very, very briefly recap on Second Republic, when you start to see the world as it really is, the way it really works, and not the way the New York Times, Fox News, CNN, ABC, CBC, NBC, and all these other networks want you to think that it works, and you start to realize why all our countries, for different reasons, are in such dire straits, and you also understand something very important. You start to see, Clayton, why this global power elite wants us all to think and act in a certain way and not to think and act in certain other ways. And that's where I think it's very simple, and I'll wrap this up right there. That's where we said, okay, if we know what the global power elite want us to do, let's do exactly the opposite. And that's how Second Republic was born.
Now, the Second Republic, what was the first, Adrian?
No, well, First Republic is the one that we presently have now, and it's a template we're working on an international basis. The rationale is the First Republic, in the case of Argentina, is the republic that we've had since so-called independence from Spain in 1810. But that First Republic although it still tries to conserve the trimmings and trappings of sovereignty and all the symbols and the presidential palace and the Congress building and laws and presidents and inaugurations and highfalutin speeches, that first republic has been eroded into a colonial administration entity. So our present republic is not a sovereign republic at all. It is a colonial administration, with the added disadvantage that at least when we were a colony of Spain, we could say, well, okay, there's the enemy, the Spaniards. Just as America said in 1776, easy, where's the enemy? In London, it's the Brits. Nowadays, we are all colonies, even America, of a supranational global power entity that has no real face, that has no real power center, because it's very well spread out throughout the whole world, although there are definite key areas and key cities from which they operate. So it's much more difficult to see, and the most dangerous thing you can actually face ever is an enemy you cannot see. So we say, since Argentina's republic has eroded into a colonial administrative entity, what we need to do is do away with our present republic. This is really revolutionary, and found a second Argentine republic, which is sovereign. That would be the main difference. Instead of being a mere colonial entity, it would be a sovereign republic. So if I go back to what I was saying just a few seconds ago, if we understand what these guys want and we do exactly the opposite, it automatically will lead any country to having to found a second republic. Because look at all the things. There are 5 key things they don't want us to do, and that we propose doing exactly the opposite. First thing, they don't want us to have a sovereign nation state. They don't want the people to have a nation state, a public institution that will look after the common good and the national interest against all foreign and domestic enemies, and taking advantage of all the real opportunities of the country. So if they don't want us to have a sovereign nation state, fine. The first pillar of Second Republic is, let's restore the sovereign nation state. The second pillar is, they don't want us to have a sovereign currency. They want the money supply to be controlled by private entities like the Federal Reserve Bank in America, the Bank of England in Britain, the Argentine Central Bank in Argentina. Why do they want to do this? So that they can control the quantity of public money that's out there and replace it with private banking money based on fractional lending. So second pillar, let's restore our sovereign currency. Third pillar.
Okay, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
No,
I just had a comment on that, but we'll get back to that. Go ahead with the third pillar.
The third pillar is, they've somehow throughout generations, they've convinced us that everything has to be done by debt. Individuals are indebted. Companies are indebted, organizations are indebted, and worst of all, our nation states are indebted. Argentina's to the tune of $300 billion, America to the tune of $14.5 trillion. Everybody, everywhere, at every level is indebted. And the key question is, indebted with whom? Who are these very tiny group of creditors throughout the world that have almost 7 billion people indebted to them? This is Shylock revisited in the 21st century. So the third pillar is, let us reject the debt-based economic system. The fourth pillar is, let's liberate our Republican institutions from subserviency and subordination to money. This so-called democracy is no democracy at all, because the only way to do anything which is political in the present world is with huge amounts of money. Look at American elections. Look at Argentinian elections. Look at the elections in Europe. The only way a candidate can be put forward to public opinion, either for the presidency or to be a prime minister or a senator or a representative or a governor or a mayor, is with huge amounts of campaign money and structural money behind them.
And where does that money go? Where does that money go? Where does that money go that it takes to... Now, I've worked in a presidential campaign, and my candidate was in the Republican Party, first person to sign up for the Republican Party. And he was trying to tell the Republicans, we can buy back the Federal Reserve for $500 million, wipe out a $6 trillion debt, which is now $14 trillion, as you said. And every cameraman on stage turned the cameras off and pointed them at the ground. So nobody in America knew Charles Collins was running. And where does this money go? Oh yeah, it goes into advertising on television and newspapers and radio, and who controls that?
Well, it's really a rather complex jigsaw puzzle where you have, let's say America. I could give you probably a good example in Argentina, which is on a much smaller scale, and normally smaller scales are easier to cope with. But let's look at the media in any country. In America, you have CNN, Fox News, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, I don't know, ABC, CBS, NBC, etc., and all your major mainstream media. First of all, they are all private companies, and they are controlled by the interests of their shareholders. So let's find out who the shareholders are of all these media companies, because they definitely have an axe to grind, and they definitely want certain ideas to be promoted, certain candidates to be promoted, and certain other candidates like yours from the Republican Party to be silenced. So first of all, you have the media ownership itself. And secondly, you have your Fortune 500, to say it in a brief recap, who control the advertising industry through the publicity agencies, through the advertising agencies and so forth, and they are the ones who actually will give the lifeline that all media, whether large or small, need, which is their advertisers. So if all of a sudden you're a media outlet, you've got a radio station, you've got TV, you've got a newspaper, and you are blackballed and don't get any advertising from Microsoft, Ford Motor, General Motors, Chase Manhattan, Citicorp, you're going to last only just a couple of months. So it's very easy to control the media through money, which basically means where advertising is going to go and where the shareholders want to go. Because basically, this whole thing about freedom of speech, it sounds very good, but if you leave the primary instruments of freedom of speech in the hands of powerful shareholders, then you have the entire media subordinated to the money power, because they themselves are the money power, and they are the first people who are interested in maintaining the Federal Reserve System as it is now, because the Federal Reserve System is what enabled the mega bankers to do huge amounts of business, huge amounts of money, to finance enormous wars, because this is not just about money, this is about politics and geopolitics. So if in comes your Republican candidate saying, hey, we have to do away with the Fed, well, obviously all these pawn newsmen and newscasters know that they have to point the camera downwards, turn them off, otherwise they're out of a job tomorrow morning.
That's right. That's right. And it's, you know, the reason I started the Free American in the first place as a magazine was because of the way they reported on what happened at Waco.
Right.
I mean, come on, you know, look, don't resist by force of arms. See what they made us do. They made us kill those 17 little children to save them from a child molester.
Yeah, incredible. But you see, there you've hit upon another very important point. They killed, how many children did you say?
There were 17 little children. There were actually 25 under 18, but there were 17 that weren't even 10. Okay,
but you've hit upon a very, very good example. 17 children were killed in order to protect them from a theoretical child molester. Now, the point is that there is so much gross lying into that. There is so much, there's a whole, it's absolutely ridiculous and illogical. And yet, one of the jobs of the media, and they've done this so very well, Clayton, is to get us all used into accepting flagrant lies, blatant lack of logic as something which is normal. So all of a sudden, people very readily accepted the Waco killings. It happened when Bill Clinton was just coming in. Janet Reno seemed like a very serious minister in his cabinet, and he got away with it. The way Bush got away with invading Iraq with no weapons of mass destruction, and the way Obama has just gotten away with saying he killed Osama bin Laden, and that is absolutely false.
I just before you came up here, I read a brief statement. I said this is somebody that's not running for president. He says he's not running for president because if he tried to do everything that needed to be done, they would just kill him the same way they did Kennedy, the same way they did Lincoln, the same way they tried to do Andy Jackson. and he made a statement. This is you know, our entire economy is counterfeit, based as it is on mounds of counterfeit fiat paper dollars, endlessly printed up by the billions and trillions. In fact, that ominous creaking sound that you hear out the window, that bone-chilling popping and crackling sound you hear gaining volume in the distance, is the impending collapse of this entire fake, sham, counterfeit economy based on fake, counterfeit fiat Federal Reserve notes. As my friend Carl Klang, who actually, you know, had it all right in his music, he said, you know, if you got your very own printing press, pretty soon you can buy up the whole neighborhood. They bought up all the newspapers. They bought up all the defense contractors. They're the ones that are building the bombs. How many atomic bombs do we and the Russia, Soviet Union have? Store it away somewhere. Somebody, what a scam that is. Okay, we're gonna kill a lot of people while they're digging out this uranium, and you know, then we're gonna make it into bombs that'll blow up whole cities, and we're gonna store it under this mountain here for the next 30 or 40 years.
I read you loud and clear, but look, let me tell you something. This is the way we see it from down here, because as I say, we've had the advantage of living through a lot of these things on a smaller scale, and what I can bring to the table, and that's why I all of a sudden started going ballistic on YouTube with all these videos and so forth. Since I was brought up in New York City, I did all my elementary and high school in New York City. I have the advantage from the point of view of my country of being able to speak English. So I figured, okay, let's go out and explain in English to Americans, to British people, to the Europeans, to the Australians, to the New Zealanders, what happened down here, so that you can understand that it's the exact same thing that's happening up there. Because you see, Clayton, what we are facing is a model. It's not just a sequence of mistakes or dirty tricks or nasty things. It's a basic model that is setting up an authoritarian world government that will make Stalin look like a little baby. This is going to be far worse, because this has technology that Stalin couldn't even dream about, and that is what's coming about. So in a way, and you're going to laugh at me, but I feel very optimistic, and I'll tell you why. If this war had to be won with arms, with military equipment, then forget it. You guys are dead. Argentina, forget it. Argentina, if America decided to obliterate Argentina, it could do so in about 10 hours, I think. It would just need to throw 20 well-directed A-bombs, and that's the end of Argentina. It would just be one big desert. So if it's a military thing, forget it. If we have to fight back on the financial and monetary and economic scale, God, no matter how much money you can bring together, Clayton, or I can bring together, they always have more, and they can print it, as you just said. So even if we could amass huge amounts of money, they control the money, they will print it. But if you look at it, the real war is psychological warfare. If Saddam Hussein were still around, he would say the mother of all wars is psychological war. So that's, I think, a key a subject for us to be very optimistic. Because if this war is being waged as psychological warfare, and we have to fight back also through psychological warfare, well then, my dear friend Clayton Douglas is a very powerful man, AdrianSalbuchi is a very powerful man, and all the folks out there who are doing these radio programs and going on YouTube and giving conferences and walking the country and taking part in whatever it is, tea parties, manifestations, whatever, we are all potentially very powerful people, because on the psychological warfare front, what you need above everything is creativity. And creativity, in our case, means understanding the model of these people and unmasking it. And the more people that understand that this model is perverse and that we are the folks who can unmask them, and the more public opinion realizes these things, then you start building critical mass. And critical mass is not about numbers, it's about the quality of people. So if you and I and all the folks out there can bring together a specific critical mass of high-quality people, when I say high-quality people, I don't mean people educated in Yale or Harvard or Princeton, God forbid, they're the enemy. I mean people who think with their own minds and who will actually start to realize what things are all about and who will take their personal sovereignty back from those people who have usurped and taken it away from them. Well, then I can tell you, my friend, that we might just tip the balance over in a very short while and with relatively small numbers of people. The important thing is that we should do this on a global basis, and lo and behold, the enemy has given us the instrument to operate globally, the internet, and they cannot take it down that easily, because if they were to take it down today, they would be in trouble tomorrow.
This war, I mean, they wrote about this one world government that they wanted, and I actually think they put the wrong names on the bad guys. They wanted one world government with Lucifer at the top. They wrote about that in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Now, we're not supposed to read that because it might make some Jews look bad. But it really doesn't matter who wrote it. They're dead. They've been dead for a long time.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is a seminal book that every American, European, Argentinian, Brazilian, Indonesian, Egyptian, Libyan, Syrian, Iranian, and Russian, especially Russian, because it came out of there, should read. No doubt, as you well say, I don't know if they were written by a group of Zionist Jews, by a group of Grade 33 Masons, by the New York Yankee fans, whoever wrote it, definitely knew what it was all about, because 120 years later, if you look at the perspective of history over the past century, you see that everything that was written in that book has come about. If they have erred in anything, it is because they could not foresee the technologies. So they will speak about the press doing this, the press doing that. Okay, they couldn't imagine at the end of the 19th century that there would be a thing called television, internet, cell phones, and whatnot. But you know, this is actually coming about. And here I think, Clayton, is the point in our chat that I would like to mention the following. You know what their secret weapon is? The global power elites, or the Zionists, or however you want to call them. It's really a mixture of all of them.
I think
their secret weapon is not that they have the Fed, although it is a very interesting and very useful tactical weapon. Their secret weapon is not the fact that they have A-bombs. Their secret weapon is not the fact that they control CNN and Fox News and NBC and CBS, etc. Their secret weapon is that they have been trained from childhood to think and plan long term. That's what Harvard and Princeton and MIT and Chicago University and Columbia University are there for. To train, and Oxford and Cambridge in Britain and the Polytechnique in France, to train the elites to think long term. And thinking and planning long term means that you start doing something today, Clayton, knowing that you might see the results 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, 50 years, maybe 100 years down the road, which even means that you might start doing something which will only be concluded by your son or your great son. At the same time, they have trained everybody else, you, me, and practically all our listeners, I would imagine, into being short-term thinkers. I'm a product of the New York City Board of Education, so I know what this is all about. And short-term think, I mean, what do they tell you when you go to school? You gotta get a career. What does get a career mean? You gotta be either an architect or a doctor or an engineer or an accountant or a lawyer, which means do something with your life, which is really short-term thinking, as though the whole world started and ended with your little life. Be a successful doctor, be a successful lawyer. Think short-term, do your life, and when you get to a certain age, you're going to retire, go play golf, and after that, game over, you're dead. And that's what they want. They want us all to be short-term thinkers, because somebody who is only trained in short-term thinking will not be able to identify and understand the long-term process that is unfolding in front of his own nose. So we see these things happening and people do not recognize them. And the media are particularly perverse because they give us so much information overload on a daily basis, which is today this happened in Libya, Prince William and Kate Middleton got married. Obama said this, Joe Biden said that, Cameron said this, Sarkozy said that, Dominic Strauss-Kahn was arrested. It's all little tidbits of a lot of information that completely saturate your brain, but they never give you the long-term perspective. So we have populations in America, in Europe, in Argentina that know a lot because they have a lot of information, but understand very little. And that's one of their key weapons. They always keep us short-term thinking, on the verge of a nervous attack with all this information overload, and they continue carrying forward their long-term planning out in the open, because they don't really hide anything. It's all out there in the open, knowing that most people won't be able to see it. So the best way to hide something is out in broad daylight.
Well, they've always been really good about telling us what was happening. I mean, they put it on television about 9/11. They had the whole show about 9/11 about 2 months before it came on. You know, they're really, you know, Obama came in and told everybody he wanted change. He was there for change. He just didn't tell you that you know, the change you were going to be looking at was begging for change on a street corner.
Yeah, you're right. Well, he's probably one of your most perverse presidents, because contrary to George W., who couldn't really utter two coherent words together, Obama is very articulate, he's very eloquent, and he has he is very capable of doing that which the global power elites seem to love, and that's looking at you straight in the eye and lying. Whilst with George W., you could tell the guy was snickering and lying at you, and he was blinking at somebody, and there were many telltale signs that, you know, this guy was not really all that good. I mean, there was something really wrong with him. But Obama has really confused a lot of people, because, as I say, he's young, he's articulate, he was likable. He was the first black president and so forth, and yet he lied his way through, and he continues lying his way through, where, for example, I remember at his very first press conference, his very first press conference in February 2009, Helen, I can't remember her last name, she's the 89-year-old White House correspondent.
Helen Thomas.
Helen Thomas, exactly. She's from the Hearst News Service. She's the oldest the White House correspondent, and she raised her little frail 89-year-old hand, and I really applaud her for that. And she said, "Mr. President, do you know of any country in the Middle East that has weapons of mass destruction?" And little Obama started squirting and squinting and looking the other way, and he really all of a sudden became very inarticulate and uneloquent, because he dared not reply and say, "Yes, Helen, there is one such country, and it is the state of Israel, who have 400 A-bombs, and we helped them get them." So if he cannot go and say straight out to his own people that the only nation with weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East is Israel, it means that who runs America? Is it the White House or is it Israel? Because if anything, if you were to say, well, little Israel has to defend itself, and you would say, look, if you look at Israel's behavior from 1948 until today, they have given every sign that they are more than willing to use those 400 nuclear weapons, not just in the Middle East, but even against Europe.
They threatened they bragged that they could hit every capital in Europe. Yep,
exactly. So that's called, I think that's called hijacking somebody. That's called blackmail.
That's right. And you know, it's really, this is probably the most difficult thing for me, Adrian. I mean, we know that Israel was a Rothschild colony.
Right.
And the Rothschilds controlled the Bank of England and fought for 100 years to control the banks and the finances and the money printing of the United States, and they were successful in 1913. So, you know, that doesn't mean that all Jews are bad. I mean, I get these races up here that think all the blacks need to be killed, all the Mexicans we need to shoot all the Mexicans, and kill all the Jews. Well, the Jews only form 2% of the world's population, but they control 90% of the wealth.
Can I put in a comment there?
Yes, sir.
They don't represent 2% of the population. They represent 0.2% of the population. They say there are 16 million Jews throughout the world. World population is almost 7 billion. If you do the math, you will see that 16 million is 0.2% of 7 billion, which means that 99.8% of mankind is not of the Jewish faith or part of the Jewish community. And the question then is this tiny group wielding too much power in